The frost came early that year, and it rode in on a north wind that smelled of turned earth, cold iron, and the last wood smoke of a banked fire. It settled over the lane between Coulter's Green and the market town of Bexmore like a held breath. It silvered the ruts. It found the cracks in an old cartwheel and made them worse. Agnes Cardo was the kind of woman a village used and rarely noticed, the way it used the well or the mounting block, a fixture rather than a person. She was 26, thin through the wrists, brown-haired under a wool cap, gone soft with washing. She drove the carrier route twice a week, rain or frost, hauling flour and mended boots and other people's small errands the 11 miles to market and back, because her father had driven it before her, and there had been no one else to take the reins when he did not come home from it one October. She could read a cartwheel the way other women read a face. She knew the near wheel had a crack in the felloe you could lay a fingernail into, and she knew, the way she knew weather before it broke, that it would not hold the week. She did not have the coin to mend it properly. She had that morning exactly 4 shillings, and a wedge of hard cheese she was saving for the boy who slept behind the baker's ovens in Bexmore. And she meant to keep it that way. Subscribe to the channel and stay through to the end of this one, because before the week was out that wheel was going to fail her on the one morning she could least afford it. The lane widened as it came down into Bexmore, and the smell changed from wet hedgerow to coal smoke and wet stone and the sourness of the tannery 2 streets over. Agnes brought the cart in at the usual hour, the sky the colour of an old coin, and she saw the boy before she saw anything else in the square. He was folded into the lee of the baker's wall, knees to his chin, and he was not begging. That was the thing that always caught at her. He never held out his hand. He only sat very still, and watched the oven's chimney smoke go up as if he could warm himself on the sight of it. His name was Peter. He had come to Bexmore 2 winters back, nobody's, with a leg that had been broken young and set badly, so that he walked with a list like a boat taking on water on one side. He was 9, or he said he was 9, though he did not always remember the year he had said it last. Agnes did not make a scene of it. She never did. She set her cart, saw to the horse, an old raw-boned mare named Bramble that she had bought lame and cheap 3 years before, and brought back to soundness through patience nobody paid her for. And only then did she walk to the baker's wall with the wedge of cheese wrapped in a cloth. She did not crouch to his level and coo. She simply sat down on the cold step beside him, as if she meant to rest there anyway, and set the cloth between them. "It is only cheese," she said. "It will keep the wind out of you a little." He did not thank her. He unwrapped it with fingers gone the colour of the frost, and ate as if he had learned, the hard way, not to trust that a thing would still be there in a minute. She stayed until he finished. Then she rose, brushed the cold from her skirt, and went back to her cart, and if anyone had asked her about it, she would have said only that it was cheese, and cheese was nothing, and she would have done the same for any dog in the square. She did not see the man in the doorway of the corn merchant's across the way. He stood with his coat collar up and his hat low, a tall man, unremarkable at a glance, the kind of stranger a market town absorbed without comment on a fair day. He had been standing there since before she arrived, watching the square the way a man watches a room he is deciding whether he can trust. He watched her sit on the cold stone. He watched her not make a performance of it. He watched her leave before the boy could think of a way to repay her, because she had left before there was time for that, and that, more than the cheese, was the thing he wrote down in some private ledger he kept and told almost no one about. She did not know then that the man in the doorway was not a stranger to Bexmoor's business at all, that his name was written on the deed to half the buildings around that square, that he had come down from London in a plain coat and a hired gig for reasons of his own that had nothing to do with cheese or crippled boys, and that what he had just watched would matter to her more than anything that had happened to her in 3 years. She only knew that she had a wheel that would not last the week, and 4 shillings, and a long, cold road home. The wheel held for 2 more days out of pure spite, or pure luck. Agnes was never sure which. It failed on the Thursday, on the long grade above Coulter's Green, with a crack like a dry branch and a lurch that nearly put the cart into the ditch. She got Bramble stopped. She got down. She looked at the fellow split clean through, and said several words her mother would not have approved of, quietly to the frost. She could not fix it herself, not this time. A cracked spoke she could bind. A split fellow wanted a wheelwright's clamp, and a strength she did not have in her hands, not with the light going and the cold coming down. There was a yard behind the smithy in Coulter's Green, where old Tolliver used to work before his hands went, and where this last fortnight a new man had taken a room above the stable and hired himself out for odd repairs. Nobody in the village knew much about him. He had come in on foot, asked after work, and taken whatever was offered without complaint or curiosity, which was in itself the kind of thing a small village found either suspicious or restful depending on the day. He was in the yard when she led Bramble and the lame cart in, splitting kindling with an economy of motion that told her, before he had said a word, that he was no stranger to labour, whatever else he was. He was tall, dark-haired, with a face that had not been handsome to begin with, and had been made harder by something, a line between the brows that did not come from splitting wood. His hands, when he set down the axe and came to look at the wheel, were not the soft hands of a gentleman play-acting at work. They were scarred faintly across the knuckles, and steady. "I have a penny," Agnes said, "for the labour. I cannot pay more than that, and the price of the fellow if you have one to spare." He looked at the wheel for a long moment before he looked at her. "A penny," he said. "It is what I have that I can spare tonight," she said. "I will not pretend it is more." He did not laugh at her, which she had half expected. He crouched by the wheel instead and ran his thumb along the crack, testing the grain. "I can true it tonight," he said. "It will want new fellow stock by spring. Tonight I can make it safe." "Then a penny for tonight," she said, "and my thanks, which I know are worth less than the penny." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, more the ghost of the idea of one. "Thanks are not nothing," he said. "Most people do not trouble to give them." He worked by lantern light while she held the horse and watched, because she did not like to sit idle while another soul laboured on her account, penny or no penny. She noticed he did not talk to fill silence, the way some men did, uneasy with quiet. He worked, and when he spoke it was short and plain, and once when Bramble shifted and nearly stepped on his foot, he only said, low, "Easy," the way a man says it to an animal he respects rather than fears, and the mare quieted for him as she quieted for almost no one but Agnes herself. "You know horses," Agnes said. A little, he said, which she would learn much later, was the greatest understatement he had made in a year. She paid him his penny when the wheel was true, and turned smoothly in his hands, and he took it without comment, closed it into his fist, and went back to his kindling as if a penny were the whole of the transaction, and nothing in it had asked to be more. She did not know then that the coin she had paid him sat that same night on the corner of a desk in a room above the stable, beside a signet ring he had not worn in a fortnight, and that he turned it over in his fingers longer than a penny had ever been turned over by any man who did not need it. She drove home under a hard, bright scatter of stars, and did not think much more about the quiet man in the yard, except to think, once, that she had not caught his name, and had not offered her own, and that this was, in its way, restful. Nobody in Coulter's Green looked at her, and saw only what she was worth, because nobody in Coulter's Green had time to look at her at all. It seemed, for one evening, that the man in the smithy yard was the same. He had looked at a wheel and a penny, and asked nothing further. She went back to him 3 days later, not for the cart which held, but because Bramble had thrown a shoe near the smithy, and it seemed foolish to walk the mare a mile further for a farrier, when there was a man in the yard who plainly knew what he was about. He shod the mare without being asked twice, refused a second penny on the grounds that he had been idle that hour regardless, and, when Agnes protested that idle hours were still hours, said only, "Then call it practice," in a voice that did not invite further argument. They fell, over that week and the next, into something that was not quite friendship and was more than acquaintance, built entirely out of small plain exchanges over harness leather and cart grease. She learned that he read, because she caught him once with a book turned face down on a crate, its spine cracked in the particular way of a book read many times rather than once. He never said what it was. She did not ask. She had learned, in 26 years of being poor, in a place that watched the poor closely, that a person's business was their own until they offered otherwise. He learned, in turn, that she drove the Bexmore road twice weekly, and had done since her father died of a fever 3 winters back, that she fed a crippled boy behind the ovens more often than she fed herself well, and that she would not take a compliment without turning it, deftly, into a joke at her own expense, as if praise embarrassed her more than insult ever could. "You do too much for people who cannot pay you back," he said to her once, watching her mend a strap for the miller's boy for nothing, because the boy had no coin and a heavy load and a mother waiting. "I would do it for anyone," Agnes said. "It is not a virtue. It is only what is in front of me." He was quiet a moment. "That," he said, "is very nearly the only honest answer I have heard in a year." She did not ask what he meant by that, though she noted, filing it away the way she filed away weather signs, that a man who spoke of a year of dishonest answers had likely come from somewhere that dealt heavily in flattering ones. It was Mrs. Yarrow at the Coulter's Green Inn who first said, over nothing in particular, that the quiet man in the smithy yard had been seen twice riding a horse too fine for a hired hand, out past the crossroads at dusk, and had come back muddied in a manner that suggested more than an evening walk. Agnes thought little of it. Men had their own business. She had learned not to pry into other people's, being jealous of the privacy of her own. She did not know then that the fine horse belonged to a stable at Everley Hall 11 miles distant, that the man who rode it out at dusk went to meet with a steward and a magistrate over a matter of falsified rents on a farm 2 villages over, and that he came back muddied because he had, himself, helped haul a foundered cart out of a ditch on the way, because it did not occur to him, even in his own guise as a duke rather than a hired hand, to ride past a person in trouble. She went on driving her route, feeding her boy, mending her harness, and did not think herself watched, because she had never in her life been a person anyone thought worth watching. That, in the end, was precisely why she was. The trouble came, as trouble in a small place so often does, dressed in fine wool and good manners. Lady Cordelia Vane, arrived in Coulter's Green on a visit to her cousin's steward, ostensibly to review the accounts of a tenancy dispute, though the village understood well enough that Lady Cordelia's true business, wherever she went, was the business of being seen to be right about everything. She was the Duke of Everleigh's cousin, twice removed, unmarried at 28, handsome in the brittle way of a well-set table, and possessed of a laugh that came in 3 practised beats, like a bell rung by someone counting. She encountered Agnes at the Crossroads market on a Saturday, where Agnes had set up her small trade of mended things, ribbons and buttons resewn, a basket of darning done cheap for those who could not do their own. Lady Cordelia's carriage stopped, not for Agnes, but for the crush of the market, and Lady Cordelia, bored, looked out and saw a woman with red, chapped knuckles holding up a mended stocking for a farm wife's approval. "How industrious," Lady Cordelia said to her companion, not troubling to lower her voice. "One does admire it in the lower sort. It is really all they have to recommend them, is it not, since nature so rarely troubles to give them anything else?" The market did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way water goes still, in a widening ring from where the stone dropped. Agnes did not look up at first. When she did, it was with the stocking still in her hand. "I did not ask your admiration, my lady," she said, "but I will take the custom, if you have any mending that wants doing." There was a laugh from somewhere in the crowd, quickly smothered. Lady Cordelia's face did not change, quite, but something behind it did. "I have no need of your needle," she said. "I have my own women for that. I was remarking only that it is a mercy the poor are given industry, since so few of them are given faces worth looking at twice." Agnes set the stocking down. She did not raise her voice. She had learned, long before this market, that a raised voice was a gift she was not obliged to give anyone. "Then it is a mercy I do not need my face to earn my bread," she said, "only my hands. I have found they serve better in most weathers." Lady Cordelia's mouth thinned. The carriage moved on a moment later, the crowd's laughter following it a little further than was strictly kind, and Agnes went back to her mending with hands that did not shake, though it cost her something to keep them from it. She did not cry. She had trained herself, years before, not to cry where it showed, because tears in a market square brought a woman nothing but an audience for her own humiliation, and she had no coin to spend on audiences. The quiet man from the smithy yard heard of it before the day was out, from 3 different mouths in the inn, each telling it a little differently, each agreeing on the substance. He said nothing to any of them. He walked out to the yard, took up the axe, and split more kindling than the smithy had needed in a month, and old Tolliver's grandson, who fetched water there, said afterward that he had never seen a hired man work with such a face on him. Quiet and terrible, and entirely without a word of complaint. He found Agnes on the road 2 days later, the Tuesday run to Bexmore, and fell into step beside the cart as if it were nothing, as men in villages did. "I heard what was said to you," he said. "It is not the first thing said to me," Agnes said, "and I expect it will not be the last. I did not come to grief over it. Let it lie. It ought not to have been said. A great many things ought not to be," she said. "The road is still frozen in the ruts, and the king is still mad some days, and Lady Cordelia Vane still thinks a face is worth more than a pair of hands. None of it is new to me." He was quiet beside the cart a while, matching her horse's slow pace. "You did not answer her the way most would," he said at last. "Most would have wept, or fled, or answered cruelty with cruelty." "Fair is not the same as kind," Agnes said. "There is a difference. I have found it does no good to forget it, even when someone else has." He looked at her then, for longer than was quite comfortable, as if she had said something that struck deeper than she knew. "No," he said, "it does not." He did not tell her, that day or the next, that Lady Cordelia was his own cousin, or that he had, within the hour of hearing the story, sent a note by hard rider that stripped Lady Cordelia of a small allowance she drew from an Everley trust, and required her removal from the district within the fortnight, quietly, without her ever learning precisely why the money had stopped, though she would learn in time that it had a great deal to do with a market square, and a stocking, and a woman with red hands. She did not know then that the man beside her cart had that kind of power to spend, or that he had already begun spending it on her behalf without once telling her so. Winter deepened. The route grew harder, the frost thicker on the ruts, and Agnes found herself, more days than not, glad of the quiet man's company on the road when his own errands took him her way, though she would not have called it more than that, not even to herself, not yet. Then the letter came. It arrived by the Bexmore carrier, not Agnes's own route, but another's, addressed to the steward of Coulter's Green, and its contents moved through the village faster than any fire. The carrier contract, the twice-weekly run that had fed Agnes and her father before her for 11 years, was to be given instead to a larger concern out of Bexmore, effective the new year, on the recommendation of a lady who had, in reviewing the district's accounts, found the present arrangement inefficient and beneath the dignity the road deserved. Nobody needed to be told which lady. Agnes read the notice pinned to the smithy door with a stillness that frightened old Tolliver's grandson more than tears would have. She did not argue with the steward, who was apologetic and useless in equal measure. She went home to her single room above the harness-makers, and sat a long while by a fire she could not afford to feed generously, and did the arithmetic of what she would do now, with no route, no father's trade, and 4 shillings between herself and the spring. She did not go to the quiet man in the yard to be comforted. She had never in her life gone to anyone to be comforted, and she was not going to begin over a lost contract, however much it cost her. He came to her instead, the next evening, and found her packing the last of the mended stockings into a basket she meant to sell door to door, now that the road itself had been taken from her. "I have heard," he said. "Then you know there is nothing to be done," Agnes said, not unkindly, only plainly. "It is a lady's whim against a carter's contract. I know which one the law favours. There are things that can be done," he said. "I could speak to someone." "No." She said it fast enough to surprise them both. "I will not have you beg on my behalf to whoever you think might listen. I have never asked for charity, and I will not start now, not even from you." Something crossed his face, quick and complicated, gone before she could read it. "It would not be charity," he said quietly. "It would look like it," she said, "and I have had enough of being looked at this month. Let it be. I will manage. I have always managed." She would not be moved from it, and in the end he did not press her, though it cost him visibly to let the matter drop. He only said, before he left her that night, "You are the stubbornest woman I have met in 25 years of trying to be useful to people who will not let me," and there was something under the dryness of it that she did not fully understand until much later, when she learned exactly how many years he had, in fact, spent trying. She did not know then that he went back to his room above the stable that night, took the signet ring from the false bottom of his travelling case, where he had kept it hidden since he first came to Coulter's Green, and turned it over in his fingers for a long time, before he put it away again, because he had made her a kind of promise, silently, that he would not use his name to fix what her pride would not let him fix by asking. The winter that followed was the hardest Agnes had known. She sold what she could sew and mend, went without more meals than she let anyone see, and still, without fail, twice a week, walked the 11 miles into Bexmore on foot now, since the cart route was another's, to sit with Peter behind the baker's ovens and share whatever she had. Because that, at least, nobody could take a contract from. It was on one of those walks, footsore and half frozen, that Mrs. Pettifer found her. Mrs. Pettifer was housekeeper at Everley Hall, a woman of perhaps 60 with a face like a closed ledger and a heart, those who knew her said, considerably larger than she let on. She had come into Bexmore on the Hall's own errands and recognised Agnes from the smithy yard, where she had once come to have a harness mended, and seen, without remark, how the new hired man and the carrier woman spoke to each other. "You look half a ghost, child, Mrs." Pettifer said, drawing her into the shelter of a doorway out of the wind. "Sit a moment. I have bread in this basket that will go stale before I use it." Agnes, too tired and too cold to argue pride just then, sat. "You knew him," Mrs. Pettifer said, watching her eat, "the quiet man from the smithy yard. Did you know who he was?" "A hired hand," Agnes said. "Good with horses. Kept to himself." Mrs. Pettifer's mouth did something that was not quite a smile and not quite pity. "He kept to himself well enough that you never asked him a wage," she said. "Do you know he paid the doctor's bill for the tanner's wife last month, and the schooling fee for the miller's second son, and never once let his name go with either? Do you know he has been doing such things about this district for 2 years, quietly, and telling the recipients only that they were not to ask who sent it?" Agnes went still. "That is not the hired man from the smithy yard," she said slowly. "That is someone with money." "That, Mrs. Pettifer said, is the Duke of Everley, child, who has been playing at hired hand in your village since before the first frost, and who I do not think has told you so, because I do not think he wished you to look at him the way the world looks at a duke." Agnes did not speak for a long moment. She thought of a penny handed over for a mended wheel. She thought of a man who split kindling until his hands bled, rather than sit idle in another man's stable. She thought, with a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather, of every plain word he had said to her, weighed now against a truth he had let her walk beside, without ever once telling her the whole of it. "He let me pay him a penny," she said, very quietly, "for work that was mine, because I could not afford better. He let me thank him, as though he needed my thanks." "He did," Mrs. Pettifer agreed. "I expect he would tell you why, if you asked him. I have known that man since he was a boy, who watched his father humiliate a stableman for the crime of being poor. And I have never in 30 years seen him do a cruel thing to anyone who could not repay him for kindness. Whatever else he is playing at, child, that part of him is not a disguise." Agnes walked back to Coulter's Green that evening with the whole of the district's weather turned over inside her chest instead of outside it, and she did not know, arriving at the smithy yard in the dark, whether what she felt was closer to fury or to something far more dangerous than fury. He was in the yard when she came, banking the forge for the night, and he looked up at her face and knew at once, the way a man knows weather that has already broken over him, that she had learned it. "You might have told me," Agnes said. Her voice did not shake. She was rather proud of that, distantly, even as the rest of her shook plenty. He set down the poker. "Yes," he said, "I might have. Why did you not?" He was quiet a long moment, the forge light moving over the hard planes of his face. "Because I wanted to see who you were," he said, "when you believed no one of rank was watching you. That is the only test I have ever found that tells the truth. Every other test can be performed for. That one cannot." "And did I pass your test, your grace?" She said the title like a blow, and watched it land as one. "You were never being tested for my benefit," he said. "You were only ever being seen. There is a difference, though I understand why it does not feel like one tonight." "It does not," Agnes said. "It feels like a penny I never should have been let pay." She turned and walked out of the yard, and he did not follow her, though it was, by every account later given of that night, by old Tolliver's grandson, who watched from the stable door, the hardest thing the quiet man in the yard had done since he arrived in Coulter's Green. She did not go back to the smithy yard for 11 days. She sold her mending door to door, sat with Peter when she could afford the walk, and told herself, with the particular stubbornness she brought to everything, that she was owed her anger and meant to keep it. But she could not, however she tried, unlearn what she had already known of him before she knew his name, the steady hands, the man who said easy to a frightened horse, the man who had never once, in 2 months, treated her as anything less than an equal, in the one place where equality had cost him nothing to grant, and everything, apparently, to keep secret. It was Mrs. Pettifer, again, who brought her the rest of it, arriving at Agnes's door with a covered basket and a look that dared her to refuse it. "He has asked nothing of you, Mrs., Pettifer said, setting the basket down without waiting for permission. "He has not sent for you, nor sent money, nor done anything at all these 11 days, but work himself half to death at that forge, which I might remind you he has no earthly need to do. Being a duke with forges enough of his own, he need never lift a hammer in his life. He is a proud, stubborn, grieving fool of a man, and I have loved him since he was 8 years old, and I will tell you plainly that I have never once seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you, not even the one he was fool enough to nearly marry, before she showed him what she was." "What was she?" Agnes asked, before she could stop herself. "Cruel, Mrs., Pettifer said simply. "Cruel to a maid who spilled wine on her gown. Cruel in a way that wept prettily in front of him, and turned to ice the moment his back was to her. He did not see it until he did, and when he saw it, he broke the engagement, and near broke himself doing it, because he had believed her kind, and found she was only performing kindness for an audience. That is what he was testing for in you, child, though I grant he ought to have found a gentler way to do it. He was testing for whether you were real." Agnes sat with that a long while after Mrs. Pettifer left, the untouched basket on her table, the fire burned low, and thought of every plain thing he had said to her in the smithy yard, and understood, slowly, that none of it had been a performance either, not the easy to a frightened mare, nor the your kindness is not nothing, and that a man who tested other people for honesty had, in his own way, been more honest with her than almost anyone else in her life. She went back to the smithy yard on the 12th day, in the last light, and found him there as she had known she would, because he had not left, not once, in all that time, waiting without ever once sending for her. He looked up and did not speak first. He had learned, it seemed, in 11 days to let her come to the words at her own pace. "I am not sorry I was angry," Agnes said. "I think I was owed it." "You were," he said. "But I did not come back to be angry again. I came because Mrs. Pettifer told me some of what you are, and none of it sounded like a man who lied to me for sport. I did not lie to you," he said. "I withheld a name. I will not pretend that is a small thing. or that it does not amount to something very like a lie, when the name was the whole of what you deserve to know. I am sorry for it. I am not sorry for the rest. Tell me the rest, Agnes said. All of it. Plainly, I have had enough of half of things. He set down the hammer he had been holding for something to do with his hands, and for the first time since she had known him, in the yard or out of it, he told her everything, plain and unhurried, the way a man confesses when he has decided the confessing matters more than how it makes him look. His name was Julian Vane. He was the 8th Duke of Everley, and had been for 4 years since his father died and left him an estate riddled with a steward's small thefts and tenant grievances nobody in London cared to hear. He had come to Coulter's Green in a hired man's coat, because he had learned, the hard way, exactly what Mrs. Pettifer had said, that people performed for a duke, wept for a duke, agreed with a duke, in a way that told him nothing true about them at all. He had been engaged once to a woman who had performed goodness for him beautifully, and been vicious to everyone who could not advance her, and he had not trusted his own eyes since. Not until he stood in a doorway in Bexmore and watched a poor woman give away her supper to a crippled boy, and leave before the boy could think to thank her. I did not come to Coulter's Green for you, he said. I came for the tenant accounts, and I stayed at first because it was easier to watch a district honestly from inside it than from a coach window. I stayed longer because of you. I do not think I understood how much longer until the night I mended your wheel for a penny and found I did not want the penny to be the last thing between us. You could have told me any day after that, Agnes said. I could have, he agreed. I did not, because I was a coward about it in exactly one way. I did not want to see your face change the moment you learned what I was. I have seen that change on other faces, and it costs something every time. I told myself I was protecting the test. I think, in truth, I was protecting myself. Agnes was quiet a long while, turning that over the way she turned over a wheel before she judged its crack. I will not pretend that does not sting, she said at last. But I have done worse things for worse reasons. I let a boy go hungry once, when I was younger, because I was ashamed to be seen giving him bread in front of people I wanted to think well of me. I know what it is to protect yourself instead of doing the plain right thing. I am not going to hold you to a standard I have not always kept myself. You are kinder to me than I have been to you, he said quietly. I am not being kind, Agnes said. I am being fair. Fair is not the same as kind. There is a difference, and I have found it best not to forget it, even now. He looked at her a long moment in the forge light, and something in his face, grave and careful for so long, came loose at the corners, not quite a smile, but close enough that she felt it land somewhere under her ribs. I will not ask you for an answer tonight, he said. I am not going to make of this a bargain where you owe me a yes, because I have finally told you the truth. I will ask you again in the spring, when the road is dry and you have had time to be certain, and your no will be exactly as safe with me as your yes. You are very sure I have a no to give, Agnes said. I am sure, he said, that whichever you give me it will be the true one, freely made. That is all I have ever wanted from anyone. It is, I think, the only thing worth having. She went home that night, with her heart doing something complicated, and did not decide anything at all, not yet, though she noticed, with some private amusement, that she had stopped being angry somewhere in the telling of it, and had not quite noticed the moment it happened. Spring came slow that year, the way it does after a hard winter, mud before green. But it came. The carrier contract was restored to her in March, without explanation, by a steward who only said the district had reconsidered the efficiency of the larger concern, and Agnes suspected, though she never asked, that reconsideration had a duke's hand somewhere in it. Quietly, the way his hands were in most good things that happened in that district, and were credited to no one. Peter the boy had a new coat that winter, and had begun letters with the vicar's wife, paid for. The whole village now knew, without being told twice, by the same hand that asked never to be named. He walked less like a boat taking on water, too, since a physician from Bexmore had seen to the leg at no charge anyone could account for. Lady Cordelia Vane did not return to the district. She had gone to Bath, it was said, on a diminished income and a diminished welcome, and if she ever learned precisely why both had shrunk at once, she did not trouble to write and ask. Julian came to Agnes on the first truly warm day of April, in his own clothes this time, no hired man's coat, though he still looked, to her eye, more like himself in the plain wool than he ever had in anything finer she later saw him wear. He found her at the crossroads market, mending as she always did, and he did not make a speech of it. He only sat on the low wall beside her stall, the way he had sat beside a cold step once for a boy who needed cheese more than company, and said, "It is spring." "So it is," Agnes said, not looking up from her needle. "I told you I would ask again. You did. I am asking." She set the needle down then, and looked at him and took her time about it, because she had learned, the hard way, that time was the one thing in this whole business that had never once been taken from her without her leave. "I have thought about it a great deal," she said. "I want to be spoken to plainly, always, even when plain is unkind. I want never to be lied to again, even by omission, even for a reason that sounds noble at the time. And I want to keep every part of myself that made you watch me in that doorway in the first place. Not the Duchess's part, the carrier's part. The part that mends a stocking and sits on a cold step. I will not give that up for a title. I would not ask you to," he said. "I fell in love with the woman who gave away her supper before I ever knew there was a duchess's coronet at the end of it. I have no use for the coronet if it costs me the woman." "Then yes," Agnes said. It was the only word she needed, and she found, saying it, that it cost her nothing at all to give. He did not kiss her there in the crossroads market, in front of half of Coulter's Green. He took her bare hand instead, chapped knuckles and all, and drew his own glove off, finger by finger, so that skin met skin without anything between them, and held it there a long moment while the market went on around them, indifferent and ordinary, as if the world had not just quietly rearranged itself. They were married that summer, quietly, in the Coulter's Green church rather than any grand cathedral, because Agnes asked for it, and Julian, who had learned by then exactly what her asking was worth, gave it to her without argument. It was, by the standards of a duke's wedding, a small affair. It was, by every account of those who attended, the warmest the village had seen in memory. A year later, almost to the week, a carrier's wheel stood mounted on the wall of the small study at Everley Hall that had once been a hired man's excuse for privacy, and was now simply Julian's own, the fellow long since replaced, but the hub kept. Because Agnes had asked that one thing of the old wheel be saved, the part her own hands and his had trued together by lantern light for a penny neither of them had ever really been paying for. In the garden below, on an evening gone gold at the edges, Agnes sat by the fire that had been laid outdoors for the last of the season, her hand resting easy in her husband's, bare fingers laced through his, and did not let go, and he did not let go either, and neither of them saw any particular reason that they should. Peter came twice a year now from his schooling in Bexmore, taller, steadier on the leg that had been mended, and Bramble the old mare, retired to easy pasture, put her head over the paddock rail every evening at the same hour, and waited for Agnes to come and rest a hand against her nose, as she always had Duchess or Carrier. It made no difference to the horse, which had never once cared what anyone was called, only what they did when they thought no one of consequence was watching. Cordelia Vane wrote once, that autumn, a letter that arrived at Everley Hall and was never opened. Julian set it in the fire unread, and Agnes, watching it curl and blacken, said nothing at all, which was between the two of them by then its own kind of plain speech. It is a small thing, in the end, to mend a wheel for a penny. It is a small thing to sit on a cold step and share a wedge of cheese with a boy who cannot pay you back. But it is only ever the small things, done when no one of consequence is thought to be looking, that tell the whole truth of a person, and it was that truth, and no other, that a duke in a hired man's coat had come to a poor village to find. That has been the story of the quiet man in the smithy yard, and the carrier woman who never once asked what he was worth before she decided what he deserved. If a tale of small kindness proven true has stayed with you tonight, I would love it if you subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. And I would love even more to hear from you in the comments. If you were Agnes, standing in that yard the night you learned the truth, would you have walked away for 11 days too? Or would you have stayed to hear him out sooner? Tell me plainly, the way she would have. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to its quiet end. I will see you in the next one.